Hello, and welcome to Session 4 in our study of the Gospel according to Mark, a book about the life of Jesus, the Christ, the Son of God, and His life in us as believers. Chapter 10, verse 45 provides this summary and overall focus of the Gospel. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Service and sacrifice, ministering to the needs of others, even to the point of death. This week, we explore Chapter 6. Lifeways Explore the Bible Personal Study Guide titles this session, Satisfies, gives the subtitle, Jesus satisfies by providing for our needs, and opens with this question: how satisfied are you really with the current state of your life? The writer offers us an understanding of the context of the focal passage for this week, which is found in verses 30 through 44. And he offers us an understanding of the context with these glimpses of the events before and after that focal passage. Verses 1 through 6, Jesus and his disciples traveled to his hometown of Nazareth, but the townspeople rejected him and his mission, hindering the work he could have performed there. Verses 7 through 13, Jesus had called his disciples to become involved in a work focused on people, to be with him, and to share in his ministry. He now sends them out 2 by 2 to do the ministry he had done. His instructions to them about possessions and lodging assumed a level of simple trust and contentment. On verses 14 through 29, our study guide says, the preaching of the disciples caused word to spread about Jesus, and King Herod heard about him. Herod's conscience was uneasy because of his execution of John the Baptist. Undisciplined desire, fanned into flame by a young girl's dancing, ensnared him in a moral quandary in which he chose to save face rather than to refuse a request for John the Baptist's execution. In verses 45 through 52, following the feeding of 5,000 people, Jesus sent his disciples via boat to Bethsaida. They encountered a storm. He came to them walking on the sea, joined them in the boat, and the wind ceased. Our guide offers this observation. Their amazement toward this miracle revealed their smallness of faith and hardness of heart. Verses 53 through 56, they crossed over, came to the land of Gennesaret, and wherever he entered, in the villages, cities, or the country, crowds followed, believing that he could meet their needs, and he did not let them down. As many as touched him were made well. Exploring the text, the writer uses 4 headings: rest, response, resources, and relief. Rest. Verses 30 through 32 is the return of the 12 and their report to Jesus. Theirs had been a balanced ministry of teaching and service, proclaiming a spiritual message and attending to the physical needs of people. And so many people were coming that they did not even have time to eat. Jesus said to his disciples, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." Rest and a proper diet are needed to serve well. Jesus joined them in their trip to a remote place. True rest doesn't come to us independent of Jesus. It is part of His work on our behalf and in us. In a spiritual sense, trusting the sacrifice of Jesus to cover our own sinfulness and justify us in the sight of God brings rest. Trying to secure our own salvation through good works brings nothing but restlessness and uneasiness. Response, verses 33 through 34. Many saw them leaving, ran, and arrived ahead of them. The intensity of their pursuit of Jesus was proportionate to the sense of need they possessed. Jesus saw them, had compassion, understood they were like sheep without a shepherd, and responded by teaching them many things. He fed them with divine truth before feeding them with bread. In our humanity, we crave the satisfaction of our physical needs. Yet our needs run far deeper than the physical. Everyone has a spiritual need, although some perceive it more than others. Some do not perceive it at all. Resources, verses 35 through 38. When it grew late, the disciples pointed out it was a deserted place, and the crowd should be sent away so they could go and find food to eat. Jesus said to them, "You give them something to eat." Remember the story, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish? His purpose was twofold. First, Jesus wanted his disciples, he wants us, to be part of the solution he will provide. Second, he wanted them, he wants us, to see how he is always enough. God's provision, Jesus, satisfies our needs. He also wants us to see. He also wants not only to see, but to use us to satisfy the needs of others. Relief, verses 39 through 44. They all, about 5,000 men plus women and children, ate and were satisfied, filled, had an abundance. Oh, Jesus satisfies with both who he is and what he provides, physically and spiritually. Any person who hears the message of Christ and sincerely trusts in him will discover that Jesus is enough for all of life. Enough and oh, so much more. Jesus also satisfies those who serve him. He provided them, the 12, those who needed rest and nourishment but encountered another crowd. Oh, he provided them the energy to serve, and he provided them the food to eat. There is always satisfaction when we allow Jesus to use us for his service. And they, when the satisfaction was full, took up 12 baskets full of fragments of the loaves and fish. That's a brief summary of our study guide for this week. And now I invite you to join me in giving a little more consideration to the point made on page 40. Everyone has a spiritual need, although some perceive it more than others, with some not at all. So what is it that some perceive more than others or not at all? What is the need? Well, let's go back to the beginning. Indeed, let's go back to in the beginning. How did God make Adam? Remember? Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. God said, "Let us make man." How? In our image, according to our likeness. Well, what does that mean? Very simply, being tripartite. A body, a soul, and a spirit. 3 in 1, like the 3 in 1, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And like the design of the temple, an outer court, an inner court, and the Holy of Holies. A body, our organ of world consciousness, our sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. A soul, our organ of self-consciousness, the mind, will, and emotions. And a spirit, our organ of God consciousness. So, how are we made? Does that sound strange? Oh, it's a real question. And I invite you to listen very carefully to Genesis chapter 5, verse 3. Because in that verse, we are told that we are made in Adam's own likeness and after his image. So how is that different? Well, it's different because at that point, Adam had a body, a soul, and a dead spirit. Remember, God said, don't eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for in the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. Did Adam die when he ate the fruit of that tree? Absolutely, yes. He may have walked out of that garden physically, but inside he had a dead spirit, a dead organ of God consciousness. And friends, without Christ in our lives, we have that same condition. We have that same need. Jesus spoke of it when he said, you must be born again. Well, did God the Father work on this? Oh, friends, we just studied that in Jeremiah last quarter. He worked on man's God consciousness through the giving of the law, the commandments in appointed times, and through the sending of his servants, the prophets. But the people would not listen, which caused him to wonder. Isaiah 5 verse 4 records it. What more could I have done for my vineyard than I have done? Oh, he answered that question by sending us his only begotten Son, Jesus. And when Jesus came, he ministered to the whole person, body, soul, and spirit. Body, we have already seen in these first 6 chapters of the Gospel of Mark, 11 of the specific miracles in the Gospel. And among them has been the healing of every kind of physical sickness, fever, leprosy, paralysis, a withered hand, a flow of blood, and even death. Soul. When the woman with the issue of blood touched his garment, Jesus felt that power had gone out of him. He turned in the crowd and looked around, asking, who touched me? And he looked to see her who had done this thing. Remember Mark 5:33? Fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, the woman came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Oh, what a picture of the state of her soul, her mind, her will, and her emotions, fearing and trembling. Remember Jesus' response? Oh, hear that glory again. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. He called her daughter, and he spoke peace to her. Well, what about man's dead spirit? Man's dead organ of God consciousness? Well, for some, Jesus' ministry had been one of casting out unclean spirits. But for multitudes, his ministry has been that of teachings about the Father and his kingdom. Teachings in parables like that of the sower going out to sow the word, in which Jesus reveals our spiritual enemies: Satan, the flesh, our sinful nature, and the world. And in the spiritual truth that when we hear the word and accept it, the word grows and produces spiritual fruit in and through us. Teachings meant to restore God consciousness. But then, with all he has done, we read these words in Mark 6, verse 6. Jesus marveled because of their unbelief. Like the Father, Jesus is wondering, what more could I have done? He also knows the answer. He will give himself, giving his life for us on the cross and giving his life to us in the resurrection and ascension. Our focal passage leads us to a third wondering. Jesus said to them, you give them, you offer them, you bring forth to them, you minister to them something to eat, something that will satisfy. And when they had shared God's provision with those seated on the green grass in that deserted place, and all were satisfied, they took up 12 baskets full of fragments of the loaves and fish. You know, nothing is said about what was done with the fragments. We just have the fact that there was more provision available than was received. The multitudes that ran after Jesus, the disciples that drew aside with him, they all could have gone into the surrounding country and villages and invited every person to come to Jesus and eat. And they too would have been satisfied. And still the provision would have exceeded their filling. Do we see it? Mark chapter 6, verses 54, 55, and 56 offers the closing picture of our study, which calls it to our attention. When they, Jesus and the disciples, had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and anchored there. And when they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, ran throughout that whole surrounding region, and began to carry about on beds those who were sick to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he entered into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the border of his garment. And as many as touched him were made well. Oh, the intensity of those who knew others who were sick and the one who could make them well. As believers, we know the real need in every life is the spiritual need to be made whole. We know Jesus is the answer. Should not our service, our ministry, our sharing, our sacrifice be even more intense than those who ran after Jesus for physical reasons? Page 40 in our guide says the intensity of their pursuit of Jesus was proportionate to the sense of the need they possessed. Do we truly sense the spiritual need in our world? Some perceive their need, some don't perceive it at all. Romans 10:14 asks, "But how will people call on him in whom they have not believed? And how will they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how will they hear without a messenger?" Isaiah 52 verse 7 says of this ministry, the Lord wants to share with us and through us. Oh, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace, and who bring glad tidings of good things, who proclaim salvation. May we not wonder on the day he comes again or calls us home, what more could I have done? May we serve others while the opportunity is given. Lord willing, I hope to join with you again next week as we explore chapter 7 and the first 21 verses of chapter 8 in the Gospel according to Mark.